Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Death in Cambodia, Life in America. Yes, I know I am coming out of retirement, and you're probably asking how, why. Wait, Dorothy, I thought you were just tucked away in a corner hiding somewhere. But no, sometimes I run into specific guests and people that I feel like definitely need a chance to be heard and be shared with everybody, people who have experience, and essentially people who can give our community second generation Cambodian value. And this is the person that I have decided to come out of my retirement for. His name is Vimean. Correct me if I'm wrong. I will give you a chance to correct yourself if I'm wrong. Vimean. He is currently working for the Counseling and Psychology Services Department at UC Santa Barbara. He did his postdoc and his PhD in clinical psychology at UC San Diego. And I had previously brought on a therapist onto our podcast before, Angela Wu, who shared her wonderful expertise on what it's like to be an Asian American and brought in her expertise on her ideas of generational trauma and whatnot. But I could not help but bring Vimean on here because he is actually Cambodian, which I think alone a therapist in the Cambodian community and his kind of perspective is so valuable to us that I really just had to bring him on and share a little bit of what he's all about. So, Vimean, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Dorothy. Thank you so much for having me and sharing so much of your kind words already about me. It feels a little strange, as you know, I grew up in Cambodia, and one of the values that we hold really dearly is being humble and not talking about yourself. So feels a little bit like the opposite of that. But I'm so glad to have the opportunity to meet with Dorothy and talk about my experience here, and hopefully it might inspire some people to want to do more work in our community together. So my whole name is Vannavuth Sochanvimean. So Vanna is my mom's name, and what is my dad's name. So my dad, instead of using his last name, he decided to combine his name and my mom's name together and create a new last name for us. And so John Vimean is my first name, but typically people back home just call me Vimean. I also go by Shinobi here as well.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Is that common in Cambodia to merge names like that?
Not at all. Not common at all. Yeah. We have my family members, my sibling has pretty unique name, pretty long, and we have 3 syllables for our last name. So pretty unique.
Wow, that's amazing. I wish we could incorporate that a little bit more in America. I feel like I have my own thoughts about how the male last name is always preserved, and then the woman's last name just always gets tossed away. Like, why can't we have both? No, that's really wonderful. Well, I am so excited to have you on, Vimean. I initially found Vimean through a Facebook group of Cambodian professionals where I saw him post about this program that he hosted that essentially helps survivors heal. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I found it so fascinating, and I actually is the first therapist I feel like that I've met who is Cambodian. And so I just really I clawed my way through his messages to try to get him, and I was like, please message me. We need to talk. So Vimean, why don't we start off just by what you do currently? Where do you work right now? I know it's UC Santa Barbara, but what do you do for work and your official title?
Sure, absolutely. So currently I'm a staff psychology at UC Santa Barbara Counseling and Psychological Services. Uh, and I went to school actually in San Diego, and I went to not UC San Diego actually. I went to California Professional School of Psychology, but
Oh, sorry.
I did do my postdoc at UC San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, I'm doing mostly just clinical work and training. So what that means is that I'm seeing clients clinically, helping them with their mental health, and focus a little bit more on Asian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm also doing some training, meaning that helping to train and provide supervision for the next generations of psychologists that are training at our site as well. I don't do any research at this point, but I did that a lot more when I was in Cambodia in my undergrad and um, writing my dissertation.
Mm-hmm. And you have a PhD as well. What was your dissertation on?
Sure. Yeah. It was funny when I saw the question and I don't remember what my dissertation title was about. So I have to go and do a little research on my own name. So my dissertation was on examining cross-cultural factors related to happiness and gratitude. So I did the sort of social experiment and so social study and experimental study at the same time. So I'm comparing Cambodians to white Americans
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their levels of happiness. So I put people into two different conditions. One, I have them write about relationship, and the other group, I have them write about achievement, right? And my hypothesis was that the Cambodian who write about relationship and would report the highest levels of happiness. So you measure the pre-score for happiness before they write, and then the post score after they write. And actually, the result was really interesting because in both group, in both Cambodians and Americans, white Americans, we found that relationship is important to both groups. However, when we look a little bit deeper, the type of relationship is a little bit different. And it's funny enough, if you examine, when I examine the content of Cambodian people who write about achievement, like personal achievement, they don't actually write about personal achievement. They write about, this is not my achievement, this is my family achievement. So let's go back to relationship too. So those are some of the interesting findings I found in my dissertation.
Is that because you think it's kind of a cultural aspect that's weaved into there? You basically ask these people to write about their achievements, but they ended up not taking on the achievement themselves and passing it on to like their other family members or their parents or whatever. You think that's a cultural difference between Cambodia and the white Americans that you've tested?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, mm. That's so interesting. And it's relatable to what you said that you feel right now as you're doing the podcast. Well, I'm glad you were giving you an opportunity to like practice teaching and I mean talking in this space. Um, I don't find it. I don't assume then like therapy and the topic of therapy is very common in Cambodia, is it? Like you branching out to this field is that unique to Cambodia right now?
Currently, currently, I'm not sure. My guess is that it's still unique, but at my time, which was a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, when
Mm,
I started college, at that time it was really unique, right? I remember people were making fun of us who study psychology, and one of those infamous rumor was, okay, if you study psychology, you're going to become crazy, right? And I wanted to test. I wanted to test it out. So at the time, I was thinking to myself, okay, I want to test this hypothesis. If I study psychology, you know, am I going to become crazy? And I think for the longest time for me, I thought that was the reason why I chose psychology. But as time passing by, years afterward, going through my own sort of professional and personal growth, my own therapy process, I learned that that wasn't, in psychology, we often say there's no coincidence. It's and even in Buddhist psychology, which is have a lot to do with Cambodians as well, that everything is interrelated. And the reason that I said that I understand that it wasn't a coincidence that I chose psychology, right? At the time, my parents didn't want me to do psychology. I wanted to do uh, information technology, IT, right? So I did two schools at the same time. So I
Wow.
did psychology and I did IT. Like my parents wanted me to go to the IT school, and then I was going to give up on psychology because but one day I still remember this. I went to the orientation at the university, and I thought to myself, I really like this. So I went home. I convinced my parents, what if I could do both? And they said, okay, you want to do both. And then I did it both. And then in my second year, I just completely stopped, IT and immersed myself in psychology. Yeah. But I think, like I said, after years, um, I learned that it wasn't a coincidence because, when growing up in Cambodia, just like many family, we were really poor. And when we talk about poor, like being poor in a third world country, right? But that is normal. That is the norm, right? A lot of people were poor. And so even though our family were really poor, but if you walk outside, right, you could see that people were doing worse than us. We could see that children were living on the street without supervision. And you can't help it but just think to yourself, it could be you. And this is one of the consequences of the war, right? One of the consequences of the Khmer Rouge. Not to mention all the mental health problems that as consequences of the war. So, and then with my own family, right, I see particularly my father, I think he have suffered severely from PTSD and probably later on depression in his life. And at the time, I really didn't have the language to describe it. And so
Mhm.
I think I chose psychology because somehow I know that there's something that I need to figure out and I want to understand it more and I want to help. And psychology has become a means for me um, to I guess to heal myself and to heal my family, to help support my family, but also hopefully to help support our communities as well.
Yeah. I think you have such a unique perspective that I do not, Vimean, because you were born in Cambodia and you were able, I am able to talk about the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge in America and within the people who had transferred to America. But I wouldn't be able to talk about how the Khmer Rouge has affected Cambodia in its current state today. So, from your childhood, what would you say, and I'm sure there are many, but what are some of the biggest detriments that the Khmer Rouge has had on Cambodia, specifically in terms of mental health?
Right. Yeah, like you said, there are a lot of good things about a lot. Educational system is one of them. I remember going to school, being even in college in psychology, there's not a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Had to go with what we have. in terms of mental health. Um, lots and lot of traumas everywhere that you go, right? I remember I was doing research in my undergrad and went to different villages to do interview with villagers for research purposes. I remember almost everywhere you go in the country, you hear the same similar stories about Khmer Rouge, right? And these folks, when they start talking, they get emotional, right? You could see that these people are smiling with beautiful faces, and then when they start talking, they start to cry, they start to yeah, and this is like 20 years after, right? And then
Yeah.
and then so a lot of traumas, and also the transmissions of the trauma to the next generation, right? There's a lot of evidence in the literature review that we see that there's a transmission from the first generation to the second generation. And the way that it gets transmitted, it's not always look like trauma. It spread out into many different forms, such as depression, anxiety. Those are the most common forms that we've seen. Um, the other things that I always this is from my experience and observation. Like in Cambodia, there's a lot of violence. Um, sometimes when people just look at one another and they get angry and start a threat in terms of violence, and sometimes really engage in violence with one another. And you gotta ask yourself question, right? I ask a lot of questions. Why is that happening, right? And one of my hypotheses has got something to do with the violence that our people experience. So now it existing everywhere, right? The violence from parents to their own child, or violence from one person to another. Um, yeah, and poverty. People, we still see children are living on the street on their own without much supervision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what else in terms of mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all those things,
Yeah,
which it doesn't surprise me, but violence, intergenerational trauma, these are all things that we have also seen on our side. There was all the refugees that came to America went through a very violent period. I think almost at Cambodians almost kind of had this quote unquote violent reputation because of the fact that a lot of the communities that had a lot of the refugees in there, Cambodian refugees, were violent communities. There was a gang culture that was kind of like tied with Cambodian people back in the 80s and the 90s, which I think then in turn turned into like feeling of shame for like people who don't really, they're Cambodian, but they don't want to be called Cambodian. So then that creates this kind of like perpetual like identity kind of crisis. Um, we have also seen, again, when we talked about intergenerational trauma, something that I've personally dealt with as well, and that I've learned through my own therapy journey. And what I've learned, the entire second generation Cambodian American community also deal with as well. Um, so it seems like there really isn't too much differences besides the location in terms of like the effects of the Khmer Rouge.
yeah. And I do want to mention mistrust amongst our own people, right?
Yes.
If you think about what happened in the Khmer Rouge, you really couldn't trust anyone, right? Any information that you share can be used against you in a life and death situation, right? Yeah, the mistrust among our own people has been really, really big. Yeah.
So I don't think when you first went into saying, okay, I want to go into psychology, what was your goal? What was your mission, or what was your inspiration behind it? I know you mentioned that, eventually it led you to feeling that this was going to be your way to serve the community, but initially in the beginning stages, what was that inspiration? Where did it come from?
Yeah, like I mentioned, so my mind was really young at the time, and I thought that I was just curious.
Yeah.
I was just curious about people. I was curious to learn why people behave differently to the
Hmm.
same situation. And more than anything else, this infamous hypothesis about psychologists. Like if you are a psychology student,
Yeah.
then you will become crazy. And literally, I remember this is really endearing. Like in college, when so you would make friends with people from different majors. And I
Mhm.
still remember sometimes people would call out my name, and when you turn around, they start throwing leaves at you. And one of the jokes that they make about it is that we would sit and look at the tree and then sort of watch, leaves falling from the tree and then analyze the leaves. So they would do that. They would call a name and then throw the leaves and say, okay, what do the leaves say to you? So sort of things like that.
Mm.
I feel nostalgic thinking about it. Uh, but my main reason at the time of going to psychology because I was really curious.
Mhm.
Wanted to know and learn about people.
Mhm. Mhm. Would you say that their psychology now still kind of has that taboo feeling in Cambodia? Is it still have that same crazy over there kind of topic feeling to it, or do you think that times have changed since you started?
I believe the time has changed a little bit, and I would speak from the lens of my friend. Her name is Radha Chon. We went to the same school and she graduated, and then she went back home to Cambodia and she's working there now. But we often consult with one another, and I get to hear her work experience in Cambodia. It seems like there's an increased awareness among younger generation,
Mhm.
and there are clinics that actually offer therapy now in Cambodia. It's still not a lot, but it seems like people becoming more aware, especially with the younger generation,
Younger generation, but not older generation.
not older generation.
Still taboo, probably essentially maybe they're still not ready. I think, and I think that's it, right. I would say so. They're not ready, and um, even the survivors here in America, some of them still haven't had a chance to really release themselves.
Absolutely. And psychology before is such a strange concept to people in Cambodia. That's why we got made fun of all the time.
Right.
When uh, at least in my case, I got made fun of all the time for my major. Um, it's such a strange concept, and therapy is really foreign, right? Like, why would you do that? Go and talk to somebody. What would you achieve through that? Um, yeah, and I still believe it's still foreign in many contexts.
I've also heard that therapy is a very Western uh, method of healing. Is that true? Would you say?
I would say so. Yes, it's a very westernized approach to healing.
Right. Right. Because there's from what I've the last interview that I had, I brought on a therapist. Her name is Angela Wu, and she talked about how, you know, another reason why it is a little bit harder to kind of assimilate the older generation to therapy is because again, it's foreign, but also it's just a very different way of healing from maybe what they're used to. Um, and maybe there are other ways of healing besides therapy that are more suited for them. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, it's very resonant with me. So the post that I posted on the Facebook page, so it's sort of like what we call drama therapy. So drama therapy doesn't belong to me, but I learned, I'm taking courses and know how to do it. But I uh, sort of change things a lot to fit Cambodian context, right? So one of the things that we typically do in drama therapy is the warm-up game. So the warm-up is so important to get people comfortable, to get people to have fun, to get people to feel safe, right? And this is when I use a lot of our Cambodian games, and people can get really too into it because they understand the game. There's a lot of what we call popular games that we usually play
Mm-hmm.
in Khmer New Year,
Mm-hmm.
and people are typically familiar with that. And there's a game that we call I Love You in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is that we put the chair in circle, right? And then you sit there, and then the game is whoever in the middle, go to somebody, and you might say, hey, you would say, I love you. And then the person can either respond yes or no. Yes, I love you back because, or no, I don't love you because. Let's say they might say, yes, I love you back because you have hair. So whoever that has hair have to run and change your seat, and then you compete for the seat, right? So those
Yeah.
one of the game. So
So,
it's getting, yeah.
yeah, and sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to let the listeners know what Vimean is talking about is this program that I think you didn't create trauma therapy, but you created this program, right, Vivian? Kind of like the structure of this program. Um, um, Essentially, it's like a workshop that
Right.
he had hosted for Cambodian Khmer Rouge survivors in and as a way for him in this program, he got all the survivors together and to warm them up, played this familiar game that they know from childhood games and stuff to try to warm them up. And then essentially the goal of this program, Vitmian, what is the goal of this program? And honestly, how many times have you hosted this?
Right, right. So this program, it was sort of the second time that I did it, particularly for the drama therapy.
Mm-hmm.
However, this is sort of part of the larger things that I've been doing with my friends that I mentioned before, Radha Chon. So, after we graduated, we want to continue the process of training the younger generation of Cambodian mental health worker.
Mm-hmm.
So every time that I have a chance to visit Cambodia, I would, before I have some connection with the Royal University of Phnom Penh, which was where I went to school, to college. And then I would did some kinds of lecture, different strategy in therapy, how to listen deeply, and those sorts of things. And so the last one that I did was on trauma informed care and drama therapy.
Mm.
So the goals, I think, for us, it originates and really want to provide more resources to Cambodian mental health workers. These people work really hard, but do not have a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's what we want to do. And then I think sort of a sub goal is to increase awareness about mental health
Mm-hmm.
overall to Cambodians.
Yeah, yeah. This is the video, all the listeners, I'm letting you know now. This video is what I saw on Facebook in that Facebook group that I felt like I just felt really compelled to reach out to Vivian for because I wanted to learn more about what exactly he was doing. And it is for this very reason because I was like, wow, this is a very cool way to start the healing process without actually having to go to therapy. And now therapy, I'm sure, if you do go, have its own set of benefits, but for sure. But it felt like a unique way to start the healing process and the healing journey. So after you would warm them up, Vivian, what would you do after?
Mhm. So it depends on what kinds of drama we want to get in, but typically in what we call a social drama, we want to create sort of fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So meaning that it's not a real situation, it's not a real place, but we create sort of pretend place so people can imagine what that place is going to be like. And the reason that we want to do that because we want to get some distance from the trigger, right? Because sometimes when we think about whatever it's struggling with, we can get really overwhelmed. So in a way, when we create this space where you could get some distance, but it's still representations of what might be going on in your life, and then you just sort of play out the story, right? And so when you play out the story as a group of people, other people are going to have different perspective. And through sharing different perspective, it can help us to see things differently. And it can help us to feel less alone. And it can help us to process what that might have been stuck in the past in a really different way. And then a little bit of fun, a little bit of laughter, right? A little bit of humors. The more that you laugh, the better it is for your mental health.
What has been the result from you hosting these kind of workshops?
Yeah. So it depends on what our goal in the moment. So when I did this workshop the last time, the goal is to help train people to sort of build skills in helping other. So that was the goal. And I think people were able to share what they learned from one another. But I think typically in a drama therapy, it's almost always accidentally therapeutic, meaning that that's not always a main goal, but people do find it very therapeutic to go through the process themselves. Right? It's like when you watch a movie and you could really relate to a movie and you might cry, you might get emotional, and there's a release of emotion. So in a drama therapy, there's a space that can happen. That it's like you going through a movie, and this movie is not really about you, but it's somewhat related to you. So it's allow an expressions of certain emotion that to come up.
I really, really like that term, accidentally therapeutic. Like I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. You didn't try to start the healing process, but somehow this conversation that you had, or this thing that you saw, or whatever it may be, all of a sudden had triggered something in you that made you feel like you related to it, and somehow because of that you kind of subsequently healed a little bit from that event. So no, I really like that term. Vimean, where does your passion come from?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I will answer that question in a minute. So, but just going back, I feels like being tangential and worried from your question a little bit. But there are other approaches that are proven to be helpful. For example, coining is literature say it's very effective. Have you been coined before, Dorothy, when you were younger?
Coining.
Yeah. Yes.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You haven't
No,
heard it?
I have.
Coining is really common in Cambodia and really effective. If you get sick, if you get coined, it's really painful and it leaves you like bruises. And so, in the old time, from what I heard is that if kids go to school and then the teachers see those bruises, they would be concerned, right? But actually, coining is found to be an effective treatment. For a lot of sickness, especially when you have a flu or coldness. Cupping is another one. I've heard of cupping before.
I've heard of cupping. Yeah. I've never tried it. But are these helping for the physical sense, or would you say emotionally as well?
Typically, we use it for physical sense, but I could see that it potentially probably could help with emotional sense as well. Because some of the emotional struggle that our Cambodians are experiencing sometimes are expressed in somatic forms. And then there's Shroud Duck. Shroud Duck means that you go to the monks and the monk offer you the water, nice sacred water, um, and then praying, right? Talking to your ancestor, giving the offerings at the temple.
Are ways for people to express their pain and
Yeah,
essentially maybe release something that they need to release.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to see, how those methods compare to therapy and what would be more effective. Maybe we need to have somebody test that somewhere somehow.
Yeah, that's a good research question.
I've always I've always had this, a lot of people ask me why I'm currently doing what I'm doing. Why did I start this podcast? Why, where did my drive come from? Where does my passion come from? And I get the feeling that maybe you would relate to me in that I just feel this need to give back to this community that I look at that is hurting and is continually going to hurt if we don't figure out ways to deal with our pain. And I think that comes from, yeah, as we mentioned, the Khmer Rouge, and now learning the effects of something like that that's so traumatic, seeing it within my own parents, PTSD, and living with, watching them deal with their own demons, and then also essentially seeing it in me. So I can imagine that maybe, as if I were to ask you the question of where your passion comes from, that it might be something similar, would you say?
I would say very similar to what you described just now, and especially, throughout my journey of life, really, I noticed like the trauma that got transmitted, right? I noticed the suffering that my parent went through. And then within myself, I still see some of the feature or characteristic that I inherit from from my dad in particular, especially in terms of dealing with anger. And I see how much it hurt him,
Mm-hmm.
it hurts people around him, and how much it hurt me. Just going through life, just sort of not understanding where these emotions are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and also, if you grow up, for me, I grew up in Cambodia, and you walk out of your house and you see kids on the street, that's really hard to watch. And we have to practice every day to not think about that, right? My parents often told us, in no matter where we at, whatever we have, we always have to be a little bit kinder to other people, which is the opposite of what the Khmer Rouge offer to us, right? Like betrayal, mistrust. So I want to keep that tradition from my family, is to be as kind as you could be. There are times you may not be able to, but if you can,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to offer that to our community and wanting to do the opposite, and what the Khmer Rouge have blessed our community with, right? Wanting to do the opposite of that.
Yeah, yeah. I think something too is your perspective on the community versus mine, from you living in Cambodia for your childhood and then into college, and then living here in America, what would you say are the differences between what you've seen in terms of the mental health issues that people in Cambodia may deal with and the ones in America that you are currently taking on as clients? Have you noticed a difference between the two?
Sure, sure. I'm going to talk a little bit from the experience of my friend because she's working there. Yeah,
Sure.
I don't have much experience actually working with Cambodians.
Mhm.
Previously I came to grad school here. Most of my experience has been in America.
Right.
In my first practicum, I work with older generation Cambodians.
Mm.
So from what I know in America, for our Cambodian people, it was really famous, at least maybe 10 years ago in terms of gang, sort of related issue related to being a gang member
Gang
for
member.
our community. But I don't have much experience with that. But
Mhm.
it is what I read and what I learned. Um, so it's not a direct experience. However, I work a lot with Asians American, and sometimes I do have Cambodians Americans that I work with. Some of the common issues include intergenerational trauma, right? Identity crisis. There's a lot of folks that not quite sure how to identify because of the complex feelings resulting from the complex trauma. Um, there are there are there are parents who suffer from trauma, and the trauma get transmitted to the children sort of unintentionally. And
Mhm.
there are folks that have trauma but also abusive parent, right? And
Mhm.
I think sometimes I have to help my students to see there's a difference between trauma and abusive behavior. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of Cambodians Americans that are growing up here sometimes really confused and trying to understand and say things like, if I were to grow up in Cambodia, maybe this isn't so strange, right? Um, some of the behavior, abusive behavior that I experience, and then I have, fortunately, the knowledge to know, no, this would be strange too. Back home, these are not okay, and I think that could be really powerful for Cambodians Americans who are growing up here to be able to say, oh yeah, my parents are not very good people. But unfortunately, there are folks that struggling so much that they're um, that they spill their suffering to their children, right? And so identity issue, intergenerational trauma, intergenerational gaps,
Mhm.
they're really difficult. There's a barrier, such as language barrier. Know a lot of Cambodians are told at a very young age here to not identify as Cambodian if you are a mixed blood in some sort of form. And
Right.
then as they grow up, they begin to question that.
Right.
Yeah. Versus people back home, the most common issue is that people suffering from some sort of mental health issue. However, they don't have language to describe it, right? Just
Mm.
have a really different orientation to life, right? When you suffer, it's just situational. If you fix your situation, then things will be okay. And as
Mhm.
we know that sometimes it's not like that. And when you fix your situation, you continue to feel unmotivated in your life, right? You
Right.
continue to feel lost. And in terms of trauma, like people tend to think that, you just forget about it. Don't think about it again. But we know that trauma doesn't work that way. It
Mm.
still expresses itself in nightmares. It still expresses itself in other kinds of way. So not having language or understanding of what's going on for oneself, right? Uh,
Mhm.
so the issue lacking, I don't want to say lacking awareness of mental health because that feels like a Westerner's way of looking at it. I think that people have really different orientation or the ways that they view mental health. Uh, and then, so finding a way to talk about mental health in that context is important back home.
In a way that they would understand, in a way that they would accept it.
Right.
Yeah. I apologize, I'm going back and forth with these topics, but quite honestly, it's because I feel like my brain is like, I am like, oh, this question and that question and this question. You have so many different perspectives, and I think I'm curious about it because it's something that I don't have. It's something that I don't, I have a different perspective on it, and you have a different perspective on it, and you have a more unique perspective. I feel like because you've been in both worlds and you've been navigating in both. Um, where do I start? What would you say? What would you say your end goal is with your career, Vimean? I mean, currently, right now, I know that a lot of it is um, giving resources back to the community for sure. I guess what would be your dream if you were to look 15 years from now? What would you want to see?
Honestly, I want to be a ninja.
Me too. We
Yeah,
ninjas together.
yeah. I really like teaching. So some sort of training and teaching. So in the future, I want to continue to do that to help train the younger generations of psychologists or mental health workers.
Mm-hmm.
And in the future, it's possible I want to have some sort of scholarship program to
Mm-hmm.
give to Cambodian psychology students.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's actually, hmm, it's actually maybe I should say cheaper, like a lot cheaper to go to school in Cambodia, and you could quite easily gather enough money to give a scholarship to one student a year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I imagine. I don't know how I make it happen. What I imagine happening in the next 10 years. Um, I I I want to be able to um, work a little bit closer to our community, and I'm not sure how that would happen. I'm still on a visa, so that limits a lot of the flexibility in terms of what I want to do and what I could do.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to be able to continue to see clients, especially working with Asians Americans and maybe more Cambodian Americans in the future. Hopefully, we can create some sort of community space, not necessarily a therapy space, because I'm Cambodian myself, I would go through a process myself, but some sort of community space where our people come together and practice what is the opposite of what the Khmer Rouge or the war have lasted. So what that means, they give us hatred and betrayal, then we give ourselves a lot of love, a lot of caring, a lot of collectivism, right? A lot of being together, a lot of supporting one another. So that would be the space that I hope it could happen in some sort of fashion for our community.
We keep talking about the second generation, and I know, and you and them as kind of being the forefront leaders of healing. I sometimes think about whether or not it is possible to heal the older generation. And I used to believe that it was possible. I don't know if it's just because I was ignorant to maybe how healing works, but I was, after the podcast and after I finished recording with my father and realizing how healing it was for him, I had this idea that like we can heal everybody and it'll be very simple. We'll all just start talking about it and we'll all just dive in together. But it's really what I've learned is really not the case. And then as I learn more about how healing actually works and how it really takes both parties to lean in, I start to think that maybe it's not as simple, and maybe the survivors, unfortunately, as much as we want them to heal as the second generation, it may not be possible for some. Is that true, would you say?
I could really relate to you a lot in terms of that feeling. As a psychologist, we like to think that we can help everybody that comes to us, but the reality is not that simple, right? There's all client factors that can make the therapy outcome different. The same with the of therapy factors. So it has to be a match, right? That both parties want it. So it's not as simple, just like what you mentioned. But I do want to mention that there are also, so I study my dissertation, right, on gratitude and happiness, because there's a talk about trauma about our people, right? But that's not the end of the story. There's a lot of also resiliency that people cultivate because of the trauma that they experience in life, right? There's a growth, right? And our people has been warriors, throughout centuries, decades, and we know that the qualities of being a warrior is some of the qualities of being a warrior are you're tough, right? You become resilient. You take care of yourself. And we see that folk with older generation, when they develop what we call post resiliency after the trauma, right, they become more spiritual, right? Go to the temple more. They feel more connected with their people, with their family, right? And then we talked about the generation before, the parents that are outside us. But for us, we also have the parents that are within us, right? Spiritually and through our genes, through their genes, we literally, inherit their genes. So they are in us. So if we do our part and take care of ourselves and healing the parents within ourselves, then we would be healing the whole generation, right? The whole lineage of our ancestor, right? And I do see this happening when people begin to practice self-compassion and heal the parents within themselves. They have oftentimes have better relationship with their parents outside. Sometimes it's harder to work with our parents outside, and but we do have a choice to work within ourselves and heal ourselves, right? So the next generation will have an easier job, even easier job than us, to continue healing.
I am speechless. That was wonderful. No, really, I think that makes so much sense. And I think you're absolutely right. I've heard the saying that people who end up going to therapy not only heal themselves, but they heal like 5 generations before them. Like they're 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 doing the work for like the 5 generations prior, and also the generations that are coming up forward after them. Vimean, I appreciate your time so much. I feel like I can just sit here and talk to you for hours and hours. I really enjoyed having you on here. I feel like there were so many nuggets in this conversation that our guests can really pull from and relate to. And most importantly, I wanted everyone to really to get to know you, and just where your passion comes from. You sound so authentic in what you want to do and how you want to heal, give back to the community, and it's very clear through what you do and how you're doing it. So it's been an honor to have you on. I'm so glad that you were able to share your expertise with everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. You've been working really hard on this. I just want everybody to know Dorothy has been working really hard on this, putting a lot of time on top of the work that she's doing, in her day to day. Like I'm just really moved by your work. And so I say to myself, okay, whatever you need, uh, I'm not used to like talking about myself, but we're doing this. But so thank you so much. I feel really honored to be in this space with you. Dorothy.
Yeah. I I will give a little tidbit for all the listeners who are listening that Vimy and I may potentially be working on a project together soon. So stay tuned, everybody. I'm so excited to share with you all. But again, thank you so much for coming on. This won't be the last that we hear from him. Thanks, Vimy.